Lennon and McCartney, the Beatles. John Lennon and Paul McCartney were supposed to be the ultimate music duo. These were two guys who were so good that they could write songs in their sleep and finish each other's lyrics and harmonies like some kind of magical brain sync. On stage and in their recordings, it looked perfect. Smiles, great performances, and music that still blows minds decades later. But behind the scenes, it was a whole different story. John was the edgy, sarcastic, sometimes dark humor guy who thrived on confrontation and drama, while Paul was the upbeat perfectionist who wanted order and harmony in both music and life. That personality clash created a ton of friction in the studio, especially as the band's fame increased. Small disagreements about song arrangements, who got credit for what, or whose idea should lead the next record quickly escalated into full-blown arguments that left other band members stuck right in the middle, wondering if they'd survive the next rehearsal. Then the drama reached its peak in the late 1960s. John had married Yoko Ono, and suddenly she was everywhere, in the studio, at rehearsals, and at meetings. Paul and the others weren't used to outsiders being so involved in their business, so they made it known. In response, John defended Yoko, and this often turned small annoyances into all-out verbal wars. Then there was the never-ending competition between John and Paul. Each was constantly trying to prove whose song was better, whose voice should lead, or whose idea was more important. Paul would pour hours into perfecting a melody, only to have John sarcastically dismiss it in front of everyone, which didn't just sting. It built up resentment that lasted for days. Even a casual studio gist could turn into a fight, with snide comments and passive-aggressive digs just being thrown around. By the time Let It Be was being recorded, the tension had reached a breaking point. Reports from those sessions describe John and Paul barely speaking except to argue, sometimes refusing to even acknowledge each other during rehearsals. Ringo even left the room more than once just to avoid getting caught in the crossfire, and George Harrison temporarily quit the band over the constant fighting. Paul often found himself carrying the weight of keeping the band together, practically begging John to stay focused and reminding him of deadlines and commitments, while John mentally checked out, refusing to cooperate unless it went exactly his way. The final snap came in 1970 when Paul publicly announced he was leaving the Beatles, and this finally ended the partnership and left fans around the world in shock. After that, any other communication between them was awkward, calculated, and often with signs of unresolved anger. Liam and Noel Gallagher, Oasis. You could say Liam and Noel Gallagher are the poster boys for love to hate your brother in rock history, with how much they hated each other. Together, they created Oasis, which was one of the biggest rock bands of the 90s. They produced anthem after anthem like Wonderwall, Don't Look Back in Anger, and Champagne Supernova. On paper, there was Liam's raw, in-your-face vocal energy paired with Noel's sharp, brilliant songwriting, but behind the scenes, it was total chaos. And I don't mean a little disagreement or creative tension. I mean full-blown sibling fights. Liam and Noel were constantly clashing over everything from song arrangements to personal insults to literally throwing objects at each other. Hotel rooms were always ruined, chairs were flung, fists sometimes connected, and tours were nearly crashed by their bickering. One moment they'd be performing flawlessly on stage, the next they'd be screaming at each other in a hotel hallway, leaving staff terrified and fans wondering what was really going on behind their picture-perfect smiles. One of the most viral flare-ups that's almost legendary at this point was during the peak of Oasis's fame in the late 90s. The Gallagher brothers reportedly got into a fight in a hotel corridor that was so heated that Liam allegedly threw a chair at Noel. There were countless other moments like this, with Noel storming off stage mid-tour after a row, Liam smashing glasses in frustration, or the two trading horrible insults in public interviews. In fact, on national TV, they called each other names from wanker to arsehole, and it didn't stop there. Many of their songs were rumored to contain subtle digs at one another. Lines and lyrics in Go Let It Out or Half the World Away were speculated to be hidden attacks and coded messages only die-hard fans could notice and understand. Even backstage, crew members weren't spared from their fights. They often had to step in, acting as referees between the brothers before a typical everyday fight escalated into something worse. By the 2000s, it was obvious that this feud could not keep happening. Arguments had become so frequent and wild that keeping Oasis together seemed impossible. Noel finally quit the band in 2009 after yet another backstage fight, officially ending one of rock's most combustible sibling partnerships. Even after the split, their relationship has stayed cold. Public appearances together are rare, and when they do speak, it's often loaded with shade, sarcasm, and direct digs at the other. Watching them interact now is like watching a soap opera you can't look away from. Simon and Garfunkel. Simon and Garfunkel were the ultimate folk pop duo of the 60s, famous for hits like The Sound of Silence and Bridge Over Troubled Water. On stage and on record, they were magical, but behind the scenes, it was a completely different story. Paul Simon was the very meticulous, sometimes moody, songwriter who obsessed over every note and lyric, while Art Garfunkel was the artsy, dreamy, and easygoing vocalist more interested in poetry and personal projects than deadlines. As you'd expect, their personalities clashed all the time. They would argue over arrangements, recording sessions, and even who got credit for ideas. One story that fans love to repeat is about the Bridge Over Troubled Water sessions. Garfunkel was filming a movie in New York, and Simon was in California, and the tension of coordinating schedules led to serious fights. They would leave furious voicemails, send snarky letters, and sometimes cancel planned recordings at the last minute because one of them was too busy or too tired. Even though their music was filled with great harmonies, their relationship was anything but harmonious offstage. During studio sessions, Simon would get visibly frustrated when Garfunkel disagreed with him, while Garfunkel felt suffocated and insulted by Simon's constant need to control every little detail. There were also reportedly moments when engineers and producers had to literally step between them to prevent arguments from turning into screaming matches that could halt the entire recording. Drama pretty much followed them everywhere. They even split and reunited multiple times, and this often left fans confused about whether they should expect more music from them or not. Each time they split and collabed again. Garfunkel sometimes accused Simon of being controlling, and Simon was cold and dismissive in return. The tension wasn't limited to recording. On tour, it got even worse. There were backstage yelling matches over the smallest things like microphone levels, song order, wardrobe choices, and even which bus seat each should sit in. One tour in the early 70s reportedly ended with them barely speaking for days after an argument over who was getting more applause during a performance. There were also rumors of jealousy over public praise of who the real star was. Fans adored Garfunkel's voice, and he often received glowing reviews, while Simon was the brain behind the songs, quietly working but sometimes feeling underappreciated. That imbalance only worsened their resentment, and in private, their interactions could go from polite avoidance to full-blown malice that lasted weeks. Yet somehow, amidst these constant issues, they still managed to come together and produce iconic music. You might not have noticed it then, but every one of their hits has traces of their conflict. It could be in the lyrics, or the emotions in Garfunkel's voice, the slight edge in Paul's delivery, or the haunting tension that lingers in songs like The Boxer. Sure, all that tension gave their music an edge. The feeling of longing, frustration, and genius all rolled into one, but it didn't do great for their cooperation. Even today, people still talk about how Simon and Garfunkel could barely tolerate each other in private, but somehow created songs that millions of people still love. Mick Jagger and Keith Richards, the Rolling Stones. Mick Jagger and Keith Richards are the definition of rock and roll bromance that went sideways a lot of the time. These two created some of the most iconic rock music ever, but their friendship is known to be very volatile. While Mick is the flamboyant, high-energy frontman who is always on the move, charming, and in everyone's face, Keith is the more laid-back, cigarette-in-hand guitar genius who cares more about his riffs than interviews. Combine that with fame, drugs, women, and a relentless touring schedule, and you've got peak music industry drama. They have publicly argued over creative control, songwriting credits, and even minor tour disagreements. Legendary stories of these fights include Mick throwing tantrums over lyrics or stage antics, while Keith would sulk in the corner or retort with biting sarcasm. There were also times when they reportedly stayed in separate hotel rooms for days during tours, barely acknowledging each other, and once a tour manager confessed it felt like walking a tightrope just trying to keep them in the same city at the same time. One day during the Exile on Main Street sessions, Mick allegedly flipped over a mixing desk after a disagreement over backing vocals, while Keith retreated to the bathroom for half an hour. Their feuds were often in public view, and of course, tabloids loved it. In the 1970s, there were months when they reportedly barely spoke and only communicated through their management. Mick accused Keith of being unreliable, and Keith accused Mick of being self-absorbed. It was a constant tug of war. One time, they had a heated argument in the recording studio where Mick stormed out mid-session, leaving Keith to finish the track alone. Another reported incident involved Mick arriving late to a concert because he was distracted by a personal issue, while Keith was fuming backstage, pacing, and demanding that the audience be informed about the delay. Sometimes fights would start over the smallest things like who got to play a solo first, how the songs were sequenced, or even which hotel room Mick chose versus Keith. Friends and bandmates often said there were nights when the studio felt like a battlefield, with staff quietly hiding behind equipment, just hoping they wouldn't be caught in the crossfire. Surprisingly, their fights sometimes inspired songs, riffs, or lyrics, giving their work that raw, rebellious edge fans absolutely love. Now, decades later, they still have that love-hate relationship that always has that's as public as it is private. Stevie Nicks and Lindsey Buckingham, Fleetwood Mac. Stevie Nicks and Lindsey Buckingham's relationship has always been a roller coaster of love songs and heartbreak. Long before Fleetwood Mac ever became a household name, the two were a duo called Buckingham Nicks, playing their music in small clubs, dreaming big, and already mixing their music with messy personal drama. By the time they joined Fleetwood Mac in 1975, the tension between them had already started to worsen. Their romantic relationship had ended before they even recorded Rumors. But the sparks didn't just die, mostly because they couldn't. I mean, just imagine having to perform the most iconic love songs of the decade with the same person who broke your heart. Go Your Own Way, which was sung by Buckingham, was directly aimed at Stevie. She reportedly would walk into rehearsals still nursing old wounds and slowly get upset at his tone, his phrasing, or just the way he strutted on stage. This tension buildup often leaked into public interviews. Soon enough, Fleetwood Mac's rise to superstardom was mostly filled with screaming arguments, slammed hotel doors, and backstage disagreements that could have filled a full season of reality TV. But all that drama didn't stop with their music. During Rumors, the band was dealing with breakups, divorces, and betrayals across the board, but Nicks and Buckingham's tension was a particular reason for them. Producers reportedly had to intervene multiple times to calm down shouting matches over lyrics, guitar riffs, and even minor tempo disagreements. At one point, Buckingham walked out of a session entirely, leaving Stevie and the band in shock and forcing them to rearrange the songs around his absence. Nicks herself described moments when she would literally leave the studio, walk to the nearest coffee shop, and cry or scream to release the pressure of working with her ex-lover who was still creatively indispensable. Yet somehow the pain and anger were the drive in the music. All the heartbreak, jealousy, and raw emotion of their fights became immortalized in hits like The Chain and Don't Stop, giving fans timeless songs born from very real and very messy human emotion. Now, decades later, The roller coaster of Nick's and Buckingham's relationship still continues to make headlines. After Buckingham left the band in 2018, officially for creative differences, but with rumors swirling about personality clashes and lingering resentments, Stevie and Lindsay's drama was back in the public eye. Interviews suggested that Nick's tried to keep communication professional, but Buckingham accused her of blocking him from certain creative opportunities, fueling new waves of tension. Fans online couldn't stop speculating about secret messages in song lyrics, subtle stage gestures, and even who got credit for specific guitar solos. But even with the many years of abetted, you can't deny their combined genius. Eventually, in some twisted way, the drama made Fleetwood Mac the legendary, unpredictable, and wildly compelling band it became. Anne and Nancy Wilson, Heart. The Wilson sisters, Anne and Nancy, have always been the heart and soul of the band Heart, but their family life has been anything but smooth. In August 2016, backstage at a Heart concert in Auburn, Washington, the world got to know how bad their family drama was. Anne's husband, Dean Wetter, got into a really serious problem with Nancy's 16-year-old twin sons. The story starts innocently enough. The twins were backstage, curious and excited to see Anne's brand new tour bus, which was a massive, shiny monster on wheels that any teen would gush over and want to explore. But somewhere along the way, the bus doors were left open. Anne's beloved dogs could have escaped, and Wetter completely lost it. What could have been a minor scolding turned into a physical confrontation. Reports say Wetter grabbed and shoved the boys, and it escalated so badly that police had to be called. What happened after was just as dramatic. Wetter was arrested and charged with 2 counts of 4th-degree assault. He later pleaded guilty, getting a suspended sentence, 2 years of probation, and mandatory counseling, but the emotional toll on the family was far heavier than any legal punishment. For months, Anne and Nancy barely spoke. Anne had taken her husband's side. The sisters, who once wrote and sang together flawlessly, now communicated only through intermediaries, each trying to process the raw emotions of betrayal, fear, and anger. The music industry and fans watched quietly as Heart's internal harmony shattered in real life. The twins reportedly felt scared and confused, trying to make sense of their grandfather-level confrontation. Anne later described the entire ordeal as a family thing blown out of proportion, while Nancy didn't hide her hurt, making it clear that she felt very disappointed in how her sister's husband behaved toward her children. For a long time, the sisters kept their distance professionally too. Nancy toured with her band Roadcase Royale, and on the other hand, Anne pursued solo projects. This created a kind of forced separation where personal grievances affected their work. After months of tension and being under public scrutiny to see who would do something dramatic next, the unexpected happened. They slowly started to reconcile. By 2019, Anne and Nancy were back on stage together as Heart, performing like nothing had ever happened between them, but everyone already knew about the fight in 2016. Hall and Oates, Daryl Hall at John Oates. Daryl Hall and John Oates might look like the ultimate pop duo from the outside with their smooth suits, catchy hooks, and hits like Man-Eater, Rich Girl, and You Make My Dreams that you can't seem to get out of your head. In reality, their relationship is a lot messier than their polished TV appearances make it seem. On stage and in the studio, they were an okay team, finishing each other's riffs and harmonies really well. Off stage, though, Daryl was the perfectionist, constantly obsessed with the details of the music, the arrangements, and the way the band sounded. John, on the other hand, was more laid back and loved to have fun. He often prioritized vibe and energy over the details of recording. That difference gave their songs some interesting dynamics, but it also led to endless arguments that sometimes turned personal. People close to them have even said that the tension often felt like walking on eggshells. Just one wrong comment from you could trigger either of them and start a full-blown fight. One of the most famous examples of their drama was during their peak in the late 70s and early 80s. Recording sessions were often a war zone. Daryl would spend hours tweaking a single vocal line or lyric, demanding total control, while John would get frustrated and snap back, sometimes storming out or muttering sarcastic comments under his breath. They reportedly argued over everything from song structure to who got the spotlight in music videos. Even smaller issues, like the way a piano chord was played or whether the backup vocals were loud enough, could escalate into arguments that lasted hours, and you can bet it didn't stop in the studio. On tour, they were constantly at each other's throats. Backstage, fights over set lists, encore orders, or even which dressing room was who sometimes turned into passive-aggressive wars. Crew members have shared that there were nights when Daryl and John barely spoke, except through their managers. It wasn't just work disagreements that added to the drama, it got personal too. Rumors started to spread about fights over relationships and egos, and some say that jealousy over public recognition added fuel to the fire. While fans were swooning over their tight harmonies and charismatic performances, Hall & Oates were boiling with resentment and frustration. Somehow that drama gave their music an emotional depth you could feel. Over the years, the fights never fully went away, and they even split briefly in the mid-1980s over creative differences, only to reunite later. But even then, the underlying friction was always there. Sammy Hagar and Eddie Van Halen. Sammy Hagar and Eddie Van Halen rocked the late 80s and early 90s with hits like Why Can't This Be Love, Dreams, and Right Now. On stage, they looked unstoppable. Sammy had the strong vocals and Eddie had the mind-blowing guitar riffs. Together, the band sounded tighter than ever. But put the bright lights and sold-out arenas aside, you'll notice that things weren't going so great. Eddie, the quiet guitar genius, obsessed over perfection, tone, and technical brilliance, while Sammy, the flamboyant frontman, was more outgoing, carefree, and focused on showmanship and connecting with fans. That difference, which might have seemed complementary, often turned disastrous. Friends and crew members have said that disagreements that started small, a lyric choice, or how a solo should be played, quickly turned into heated fights. During the recording of OU 812 and For Unlawful Carnal Knowledge, there were tensions over songwriting credits, royalties, and even the direction of the band. Eddie would get frustrated if Sammy wanted to change a riff or simplify a song to make it more radio-friendly. And Sammy would snap back if Eddie spent days obsessing over a single guitar part instead of finishing the track. There were also famous backstage fights during tours, with one story about an argument over a set list escalating to the point where crew members had to step in to prevent a physical confrontation. The band's manager later revealed that these feuds were a constant headache, with both of them holding grudges that sometimes lasted weeks, and this affected not just their music, but everyone else in the band. Offstage, their rivalry also had a personal edge. Stories circulated about financial disputes and ego clashes, with both Hagar and Van Halen stubbornly protective of their contributions and unwilling to give an inch. The heated arguments, the constant push and pull, and even the grudges somehow led to some of the band's most memorable music. By the mid-1990s, after years of constant conflict and creative disagreements, Sammy left the band for good, and fans were shocked and heartbroken. Clearly, no matter how much magic they made together on stage, it wasn't enough to fix the hatred they had for each other. Which duo did we miss in the video? Let us know in the comments. If you enjoyed this video, then hit the like button and share it with everyone you know who would love to see it. If you'd like more videos like this, then be sure to subscribe to our channel and hit the notification bell so you don't miss our next videos. Until next time.